So welcome, everybody. My name's Janet Bronstein. We'll get to know each other, I guess, at some point. This is Marion Buckley. I was one of the people who started this Shambhala Center in 1998, I think. But I've been part of the Shambhala Buddhist meditation community since 1979. Just that when I moved here, I already was linked in, and so when a few other people moved here, we started this center, which has been here more than 25 years now. And to which, when we go other places with Shambhala community, and they ask, I don't know if you had this experience, you may, they ask you where you're from, and you say Birmingham, Alabama, and they say, they have a meditation center in Birmingham, Alabama. You know how people are. Yes, yes we do. This series that we just launched last week, before our Monday meditation, we are calling this Shambhala 101. Because even though we've been part of the Shambhala community ever since we were started, we don't talk that much about what it is. And someone began to dawn on us that it's not obvious. And actually what Shambhala is, I happen to think is quite interesting. And so we designed this series to introduce some of the history, the ideas, the aspirations, the realities, and it's, I don't know if y'all are having fun, but so far I'm having a lot of fun talking about this. And so what I want to talk about today is pretty similar to where I started last week, with a few little twists. And I thought we'd do that just to make sure, you know, people can't come some Monday, they don't miss the thread. Not that it's going to be a sequence, but that's what we were thinking. And so I probably will do this every time, but I just wanted to start with, since we're here at a meditation center, what is meditation in the first place? Like, what is it that we're doing or we're wanting to do? And I would say, to be really simple, meditation is a practice that we can do where we create a situation that helps our mind settle. Because, you know, mostly we have a lot of dialogue and description and arguments and fantasies, etc., going on in one part of our mind. But underneath that, we have a space in our mind that's just settled and present and aware and connected to other people, to the world, to our bodies. Every once in a while, we notice that, and then we kind of lose track of it again. That's just the nature of how human minds work. But the point of meditation practice is, well, our glimpse of that settled, open, almost would say our genuine place or our home place, while our glimpse of that is very quick, that nature of our minds is there all the time. And so what we do in meditation is teach ourselves to notice that and kind of gravitate towards it, towards that open space. And we say that that's just the nature, you know, what it is to be human is both of those things. We have the blah, 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 and we have the steadiness. And then the question is just, how do we notice where we are, and what do we do with that? But I wanted to tell you that the other day I watched a show that public PBS had on called Wired for Connection. And it was, I'm sure you know these themes, but it was about how humans are naturally social people, and we thrive when we're connected to other people. In fact, we have to be. And in fact, now there's all this research that people who get disconnected from others die sooner and get sicker, right? Have all kinds of medical compromises, which they provided a lot of data about that. And also, these days, people do functional MRIs and they can scan people's brains, and there's a difference between the neurological functioning of people who are socially connected and people who are not. And then they were talking about, a little bit, we talked about this last week, but the things in our environment that kind of make it hard for us to stay connected to other people, and the lockdown and the pandemic was a big factor. Also stress, being pushed to be productive all the time, and not taking the time to cultivate our relationships. What else? Yeah, how you were raised, all of these things. And then at the end, they were talking about what could you do about it? And I'm listening along, Alex says, and meditation is very good for dealing with that, right? And then they brought in Mingyur Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. That's the one of us that are even taking classes with. One of his students is that Dr. Richie Davidson at University of Wisconsin that does all that neurobiology of meditation. So he's wired Mingyur Rinpoche up with all these electrodes, so they can compare the brain of a very, very practiced meditator to somebody who's not, and see the difference. So anyway, what Mingyur Rinpoche said about that, like why would meditation help with that? He said in that thing that what meditation does is it gives you, it teaches you to access the space between when you get a stimulus and when you respond to it, he says. And then when you are in that space and you notice, oh, this is stressing me out, you have the option to choose not to go there because you see it beforehand. And that's the way that meditation is, that intervention in the stress. And then Richard Davidson explained exactly where in the brain you could tell that was happening. Anyway, those aren't two different things, like me saying we can find the space where we're just open, and Rinpoche saying you can make a choice, right? That's just two different ways to describe the same thing, which is that there is a space of awareness in our minds that we can access if we know how to find it. And when we access it, we're better able to make choices. So that's why we come and meditate, or one variation of that. So this observation is not something that we only know because in the last 10 years we've figured out how to run functional MRIs, right? This is something that human traditions have known for thousands of years. You can go into the ancient Greek literature and you see descriptions of how humans' minds work. You can go into the ancient Chinese wisdoms. You can go into most, I think, probably all wisdom traditions, and there's a piece where it will tell you, look, you've got this going on, but you also have this, and let's see how you can make that choice. One of the wisdom traditions that has just been very, very developed in this observation is the Buddhist tradition, which is 2,500 years old, as you probably know. And Buddha, that word Buddha means awake, actually. And so Buddhism is the tradition of how do we wake up, which is what we mean when we say how do we find that awareness space and work out of it. the Buddha means the awakened one. So one of the things that's said about Buddhism is that the teachings about that, like the teachings of how does our mind work and how to practice meditation, that the wisdom about that is like clear water. It's not complicated, it's very simple, and it's based on observation, and it just is what it is. And the reality about water is to drink it, you have to have a cup. You have to have some kind of a vessel, which is another way of saying that humans, us, we're social people, we make meaning with each other, we talk to each other. To have somebody teach us something, they have to have a language, they speak in a language that we understand, right? Language in terms of I don't know how to say it, the actual language like English instead of Chinese or Sanskrit or Tibetan, but also in the metaphors and the examples and the observations and all that. It can't come to us in its pure form. It always comes in some sort of a cup or a vessel. So last week I was talking about, so when you talk about Buddhism and you talk about different places where Buddhism has been taught over the many thousands of years that it's existed, those are just different vessels, right, for the same teachings. And so Zen Buddhism is a vessel. It's related a lot to Japanese culture and aesthetics and history and the insight meditation community that we have now in the United States. Those teachers originally studied in Thailand and in Burma, even for the most part. And so they shaped insight meditation based on that vessel from that era. And then the reason this is useful is that what we call Shambhala in our community is a new vessel, or it's a particular kind of vessel that we are actually in the process of crafting together now, which is intended to carry some of the profundity of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition into the modern Western world in this era. But what I wanted to add that we had talked about last week in our after conversation is that two things that we talked about. The Buddhist vessel doesn't always meet our idealistic expectations of what Buddhists should do, so that there's examples of Buddhist fundamentalists. In World War II, the Buddhist hierarchy in Japan supported the war effort. Right now in Myanmar, there's a Buddhist leader who's really inflaming and leading the people who are persecuting the Muslim community. So that, the vessels don't meet our expectations. Vessels also, they change and they get corrupted. So that's one thing I think I would add, is that like a vessel works for a particular time and place, but you have to kind of be observant because they don't always, and we know this from our traditions too, right? Like you have early Christianity and all the things that were involved in that, and then you had it becoming institutionalized, and I was just reading about this, that there was gender equality in the early Christian church, then that was changed into patriarchy later on. So it just struck me that this metaphor of the spiritual tradition is pure, but it always gets poured into a vessel, and then the vessels don't always meet our expectations. That's generically true for all religions. It's not just Buddhism, right? Because Jim will know, we were talking about each of our own experiences with our own birth religions, which were mostly not Buddhism. And, the things that inspire us about that tradition and the things that don't inspire us about it. And so, it's not like Buddhism's any different. This is a human situation. So I did want to say that. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? So we drink from the vessel, and then we're trying to pay attention to the water also. Okay, so then to talk a little more about this Shambhala. And Shambhala, by the way, means, I think one translation anyway, is source of happiness in Sanskrit. And it derives from a tradition or a set of myths that predate Buddhism. So that the indigenous society of Tibet also has an idea of, source of happiness, what it refers to is a society or a community or a kingdom where people are happy. And they're happy, in the Buddhist tradition we say they're happy because they can practice meditation and they have access to wisdom. And also, they're not hungry, and particularly there's a lot of nice fruit trees. That's in the tradition. But a peaceful place like that, that there's a book from the 1940s called Lost Horizons. James Hilton, and he talks about Shangri-La, which was his version of Shambhala. But it's, I don't know, one thing I've heard that whole process of having a myth of a wonderful place where everything is supportive and happy is called social dreaming, and every culture does it. In the West, we have Camelot, right? Okay, they don't necessarily practice meditation, but they're noble and brave, and they conquer the enemies and blah, blah, blah. So every culture has it. So Shambhala takes its name from that notion, or that, it's not a notion, but an aspiration, let's say. So this meditation center is called a Shambhala Center. Because it's part of a network. We think there's about 110 centers and groups now around the world. And we were all founded by a particular meditation teacher who left Tibet in 1959 when the Chinese invaded. I don't know if everybody's familiar so much with the history of Tibet, but we know the Dalai Lama, who now lives in India, left Tibet as a 14-year-old in 1959, because the Chinese, when they were invading Tibet, were actually targeting all the people who were meditation teachers, since they were like the leadership and the elite. So the Dalai Lama came from Tibet to India when he was 14. The person who founded our network of centers, his Buddhist name was Chogyam Trungpa. Trungpa is the Tibetan lineage that he was part of. And in that system, when somebody leads a lineage, a lot of times they're said to be the incarnation, the reincarnation of the last person who led that lineage. I think we cynical Westerners don't always necessarily buy into it, but the old-fashioned Tibetans do. So the Dalai Lama, who's now almost 90 and lives in India, he's the 14th Dalai Lama, they say. Chogyam Trungpa was the 11th of the Trungpas. He came, as I said, he walked over the Himalayas, pursued by the Chinese, and came to India in 1959. Lived for a while in India, was doing these jobs that his superiors in the lineage assigned him to do, but didn't think that was his destiny. So in 1963, he got himself a scholarship to Oxford, England. And he went to England and studied comparative religions for, I guess, about 5 years. Then he established his own meditation center in Scotland, and in 1970 he came to North America. So, and I'll be talking more about him over the course of this series, but when he established this network of Shambhala centers in the early 1970s, he wanted to call them Shambhala centers, and he said because he wanted us all to be inspired by the idea that you could have a society that would support you in meditation practice. I want to say more about that in a minute, but just to say that we call ourselves Shambhala meditation centers, but we don't say we're Shambhala Buddhist meditation centers. And the reason is because people from all different traditions can practice meditation and like to. And not everybody wants to take on a different religion and become a Buddhist. Some people do, but not everybody. And so the notion is that for us, and this is part of the idea of a supportive society, the main thing is we could be a community that supports each other in practicing meditation, which is what we aspire to be. So that's why we and the other 109, I don't know if it's either 110, 108, or 114, and it just depends on whether you're counting the 1 or 2 people that live in X, Y, Z. Anyway. Yeah, so I think really the main thing I want us to just begin to think about is, when this Tibetan Buddhist teacher came to North America and wanted to help us establish a network of centers, he said, look, there are things in this modern Western societal environment now that make it really hard for us, for you, for us, to practice meditation. For one thing, it's rather odd. It's not how we were raised, and it's not how most of our friends spend theirs Monday nights. And so, we don't have a tradition, and that's one obstacle. He was very, I wouldn't even say depressed by the level of materialism that's in our society and the way everything kind of gets sold and commodified, and people use everything, including meditation and spiritual teachings, to build up their ego. And so that becomes an obstacle, right, to meditation practice. What else? We we don't trust spiritual authority. I don't know if you noticed that, but most of us, if somebody tells us, do this and it's good for you and it'll make you feel holy, a lot of us are like, oh no, thank you. And so that sort of doubt of that there might be somebody who knows something that we could learn from makes it hard. You always have to come over that kind of cynicism to actually be able to learn. So there were a lot of things in our environment, he said, would be good to work with if we wanted to really build a supportive community. But on the other hand, there were things, when he came to North America, there were things here that he liked about our culture and our society and our time. And he thought, oh, this has a lot of potential to actually, we could actually do this. He was actually optimistic about it. And so since last week we talked about what the hard things were, I thought it might be interesting and we just spend a few minutes like, what's great about our background, the way we're raised, the information we have, that really makes it possible for us to practice meditation? That's a question, so.
Well, I'll go. I was raised Catholic and spent a lot of times kneeling on a pew in a church. And as you know, my mother would hit me on the back of the head if I'd look around or wasn't paying attention. So that got me into a place where I could actually knock myself in the head and say, look, pay attention, be aware.
Oh.
So that's as far as I was raised, I believe that had a lot of good benefit from me.
It's very cool. Thank you.
I think as a culture, we're open to reinventing ourselves.
You want to repeat that for the microphone?
I think as a culture, we're very receptive to reinventing ourselves, and I think that lends itself to an openness that is very conducive.
I think that's very, very true. Thank you. I think children come to like that about us.
I think the critical thinking along those lines, questioning things,
Right.
not taking things on just face value,
That's huge.
which is what Buddha said. So
Yeah, because that's one reason a lot of us gravitate to Buddhism.
it allows you to
Yeah.
sort of fade into that critical thinking.
Really? Is that true?
We can question, we
Yeah.
can check it.
Yeah.
This space sets you up for success in that, like, it meets you wherever you are.
Mm.
And that has always been a wonderful feeling for me, walking in here.
And, that being said, we were able to start this meditation center. Once, many years ago, in the mail somebody mailed us some tract from the Book of Revelations about, which I guess we interpreted as, I guess this person thinks if you have a meditation center, you're going to meet Judgment Day or something. That's the only time in 25 years that anybody ever said to us, you can't have a Buddhist meditation, you can't have a meditation center in Alabama. So, that's just to say we could do this. Yeah. I'll just say one other thing that Trungpa Rinpoche really liked about our culture, and I think it goes along with what you're saying. He loved the way we do art and creative processes. He at one time did avant-garde theater. He liked innovative dance, visual arts, poetry, like Allen Ginsberg was one of his students. And he said, where he grew up in the Asian tradition, there's one way to do poetry and it's this way, right? There's one way to do this and it's kind of rigid. But here it was pretty open, so. I wanted to say that, I think as we create this vessel for meditation teachings, we want to know what we want to be careful of that we don't want to do. But we also want to know what we can tap that is going to be totally helpful to us. So, 7 o'clock. Thank you. We'll just take a stretch, and I'm gonna light this shrine, and then we'll move into some meditation.